новостях в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак, и вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.
И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
آمریکایی‌ها، اونهایی که با سیاست‌های این منطقه آشنا هستن، میدانند که ورود آمریکا در این قضیه 100% به ضرر اوست. اونچه که او در این زمینه ضربه خواهد خورد به مراتب بیشتر است از اونچه که ایران ممکنه صدمه بخوره.
قسم به فریاد آخر به اشک
آخرین نفس راحت را ادامه خواهیم داد ای شهید. آخرین نفس راحت را ادامه خواهیم داد ای شهید.
Hello, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 25th of June, 2025, and here we are with a live stream tonight. It's our regular Q&A session has returned, so we're going to be taking your questions both from the chat and from email. So I'm going to start off with stuff from the chat, then we're going to get into the emails in just a moment, and we'll see what comes up. Now, I hope you enjoyed the second introduction there. What I've done is just I've been going through some Iranian revolutionary songs, some of which, by the way, are absolute bangers. So I put together like footage from largely Israeli TikTok of like bomb damage to Tel Aviv, Haifa, and various other places. And you can see that the damage is much more extensive than, of course, the US imperialists and their Zionist colony are admitting to, which is interesting in itself. So let's go right to it then and say hello to Jenny, our moderator, and to Caustic Grip, to Jerry. Nikki, first question of the evening, says, hi, comrades. What do you think of Zoran Mamdani's win as New York mayor? Is this an AOC 2.0? Well, he hasn't won the mayorship yet, the mayoralty. He's won the Democratic primary against a pretty despised figure, really, in the form of Andrew Cuomo. So he's not won the mayoralty as yet. But the way I would look at it is that the anybody who runs in the Democrats runs for the Democratic Party, just the same way, by the way, that anybody who is within the Labour Party or any of the traditional left of centre parties is already a deeply suspicious figure. So Zoran Mamdani might talk a good game on a few issues, but he is essentially an American social democrat, which makes him prone to social imperialism and social chauvinism. Yes, he didn't do the traditional groveling to Israel that Cuomo and the others engaged in, but whether will he do anything good for the working class of New York City? My bet would be no. And the details I've seen so far are that, in actual fact, Cuomo had the bigger lower income voting base than Mamdani did. Mamdani's base seems to be petty bourgeois progressive types, and this is the key problem with the American left as it is currently constituted, which is it produces these figures. I believe the mayor of Chicago is similar, who proclaim themselves loudly to be socialists, but in actual fact are thoroughly like petty bourgeois progressive types who just wear the socialist label. Now, will Zoran Mamdani, if indeed he even does win the mayoralty, will he be able to do anything? My guess is no. My guess is that the mayor of New York is much like the American president, which is that, yes, nominally the office has a lot of power, but he is within a system which is, of course, deeply reactionary, and which is, of course, one of the centers of world imperialism. And so do we really think that with all the powerful bourgeois interests inside New York, that he is going to be able to do anything? Are they going to let him do anything? No, he'll be Bill de Blasio 2.0, which is a lot of talk, a lot of progressive talk, a lot of posturing, a lot of big speeches, a lot of petty bourgeois podcast hosts getting very excited about him. And then it'll be followed by the inevitable crashing disappointment, because when you're faced with a powerful and entrenched enemy, which the New York-based bourgeoisie undoubtedly are, I mean, this is Wall Street, for God's sake. This is like the masters of the American Imperium are based there. Are they really going to allow him to do anything that threatens their interests? No. And if you don't do something that threatens their interests, then you immediately sell out and alienate the working class, which he would need to win the actual election. So Zoran Mamdani is just going to be another left-wing sellout. Again, anybody who runs within the Democratic Party should be immediately viewed with the greatest suspicion. And he will, maybe he is sincere in some of the things he wants to do, but the power of the US bourgeoisie in New York will crush him. And New York, by the way, isn't just a city, any old city in the United States. It's one of the centers of imperialist power globally. So they're not going to let the mayor of that city run off on some sort of radical deviation that they've not approved of, are they? And if when they bring the hammer down on him, and they don't think they'll have to do much, few negative headlines in the New York Post and the New York Times, particularly the New York Times, and he'll fall at their feet and beg them for mercy and say he'll do anything to win back their approval. This is what social democrats in imperialist countries do. They run scared of the bourgeoisie constantly. So as soon as the bourgeoisie in New York says, no, we're not doing that, Mamdani will crumble. He'll crumble like a cheap meringue. And all the petty bourgeois progressives and leftists will cry and wail about the mean Republicans and, you know, the corporate Democrats. Remember, that's old Chunk Yogurt's favorite phrase. He's a corporate Democrat, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean. And it'll turn into ashes in their mouths. And then they'll find a new hope. Then they'll find a new hope to pin everything on, you know? So this is the way of things. And just as with the squad, Ocasio-Cortez, everything else, the disappointment will be very, very quick in coming, because no real reform is possible within the American system, within the US system, not inside New York, not if you're the mayor of New York, not if you're the American president himself. The only way you would ever be able to get anything out of the US bourgeoisie or the British or any other bourgeoisie would be to actually have a mass movement which would be able to be of the working class and would be able to be mobilized in such a way as to scare the shit out of the ruling class to the point where they would make concessions. Zoran Mamdani's pseudo Green Party shit isn't going to cut it. That's not going to scare them. They have the American ruling class have the measure of people like him, and they'll ground him up and spit him out if he tries to do anything that annoys them. Or more likely, he'll buckle to every demand that they make and leave office a despised and discredited figure, just like Bill de Blasio did, and be replaced by somebody who's like a mad reactionary, like Eric Adams. So do not get your hopes up. You see all these fucking Twitter leftists, like people who in one paragraph on Twitter will go from saying we are all Luigi. Remember that? Go from endorsing individual assassinations, which, whilst it's funny to wind up bourgeois types like that, politically it's a complete dead end. So you get people who are going from screaming "we are all Luigi" to saying, "Oh, vote for this fucking guy because this is going to be the path to socialism." This is the classic thing of reformists. They have no real ability to connect with the masses or any desire to. So they'll go from supporting lifestyleism, terrorism, assassination on the one hand, to the worst kind of liberal cadaver on the other. So again, this is the way it's been. And even if Mamdani does mean everything he says, the system will grind him down. And then when the system comes for you, you have two choices. You can either go out and try and organize the masses in your defense, which I think from everything I've seen of him, he would be wholly incapable of doing, to the other thing, which is he will capitulate. And my bet is capitulation within 6 months, followed by Chapo Trap House doing a grisly post-mortem where they wail and cry about, wow, where did it all go wrong? My God, why isn't the DSA up to it? Jesus. Right. Okay, so hello, Slumbering Colossus, Mushkin, Carter Man, Dinner with Franklin, Robert. Carter says, greetings from Seattle. Elena Xenophonatos is predicting this is the beginning of a full-scale World War III type war. Have you heard her take, and what do you make of it? I haven't heard it, so can't really comment on it. I mean, you gotta distinguish here, in my view. Again, I haven't heard Elena's analysis of this, so this is just my development of the thought about World War III. People expect such a war to be suddenly declared, like World War II was, or World War One, like the president of the United States going out there, maybe after a vigorous game of golf, and saying, "I'm sick of it. I've had it with these Russian guys. It's time for a war. I'm declaring it right now," and go to Congress and get authorization, etc. It's not going to happen like that. Like first of all, because the great powers of the world, certainly the imperialist power, the primary imperialist power, the hegemon itself, the United States, the president hasn't declared war on anybody, I don't think, since, well, they got authorization for the use of force 24 years ago and haven't had gone to Congress since for a declaration of war. And they didn't even get a declaration of war there. It was a special measure. So there was no formal war ever declared on Vietnam. There was no the operation in Korea, I believe, was a UN authorized operation. I'm not sure about the congressional approval. And so the last time I think an American president actually properly went to Congress and asked for a declaration of war was the early 1940s with Roosevelt. So you're not going to get that, nor are you going to get suddenly like everybody saying it's the this is the beginning. What we're in the midst of now is the long war of imperial decline. I mean, maybe a better comparison would be something like, I don't know, the War of Spanish Succession, the 30 Years' War or something like that, because that's really what this is going to be. And arguably, World War II itself was actually, I mean, the Chinese make the accurate claim that it started actually in, 1931 with the Japanese annexation of Manchuria. And you could argue that it didn't really end until like, I would argue, like the end of the Korean War. So that was a 20-year plus period. I mean, you could even stretch it to say that almost the first half of the 20th century was one continuous war, revolution, and counter-revolutionary process that ran from about 1914 all the way through till about 1953, 54, 40 years. Because you get the beginning of World War One, and then you get the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, which grows out of that. You then have the attempt to suppress it, which runs up to 1921. You then have various revolutions and wars all over the world, which are then rekindled by the Japanese and their annexationist moves. And then you have the attempt to suppress socialism and anti-colonial revolution by the imperialists that runs up until the early 1950s, and then it pauses slightly. So you could argue that it was a 40-plus year war that ran up into the middle 50s, and then hasn't really stopped since then. So when we look at this, these are all aspects of the war waged by imperialism in an attempt to preserve itself, and it is in finding it increasingly hard to preserve itself. I would argue that the current war will be seen as having been started probably in 2014, probably with the coup in Ukraine, because that set the stage for everything that is happening now. And it has been evolving over the course of the last 11 years through the constant war in Ukraine, the constant tension and near war and terrorism operations, sabotage operations against Iran, against Syria, the resistance forces in Palestine. All of this is part of one big picture, which is the US-led imperialist order trying desperately to preserve itself, but being increasingly incapable of doing so. And this war will last a long time. So I haven't seen Elena's analysis, so I can't comment on like how she defined it. But Marius might be right when he says in the comments that he could say it started with the Syria war in 2011 to 12. Fair comment on that one. So could be regarded as starting then. And it will end only with the destruction of the ability of the US-led order, and it is the US is power that is underpinning all of this. When the US loses the ability to project its power in the world, then the whole Western order will finally come crashing down, because suddenly they won't be able to carry off any kind of realistic military threat anymore, because it's only the US which is a realistic military threat. Nobody else is in this order, which is why the Germans and Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of BlackRock, is desperately puffing his chest out and screaming about German remilitarization at the moment, is in the vain hope that they're going to carry off some kind of threat. I've read the official NATO communique that came out today. Their promises of increased defense spending are meaningless garbage. So we will see. I think we're in the middle of what will later be seen as a war that will last at least 20 to 30 years. It'll have various different battlefields. There will be various different phases: hot war, cold war, but it will be one war that is the war of imperial decline, and it is one that they are slowly losing. This latest war against Iran is the latest phase of that, and it was, as we said, and we're going to go into this in the Decline and Fall episode we're doing tomorrow. As we have said before, it is aimed at destroying Iran, and it failed. So in that sense, for all the damage that was done and the problems that were within Iran that were revealed, it is a war that Iran came out ahead on. But it will return. The war will return to Iran before too long, because the imperialists cannot leave it alone. Just as they cannot stop the proxy war against Russia, and they will attempt various different things against China as well. Xavier Coombs says, what do you think about the Economist saying Iran is taken over by the IRGC after reformists let the US dog walk them? Is there any truth to it, or is the Economist doing Lenin? Well, they are. The Economist are, wretched propagandists of British imperialism, always have been, as Lenin commented. There's some of the dumber ones as well who think they're clever. I mean, they may be right. I don't know at the moment. I need to speak to more Iranian sources. We have an interview with Comrade Bahman Azad coming up on Friday of this week, so keep an eye out for that. But given that the Pezeshkian government got made to look very stupid by Trump and the Israelis, Pezeshkian's ability to do anything, I would say, will have diminished sharply. And also the political ground that he exists on, which is that of the typical Iranian liberal comprador type, which is if they grovel enough to the West, they'll be patted on the head and told they're good boys. Well, that political ground has gone. The revolutionary sentiment in Iran has increased sharply, just as the revolutionary and patriotic sentiment in Russia has increased sharply since 2014, and has increased more sharply since the war was a full spectrum war was unleashed on them by the West. Same is in process going on in Iran now. So that'll weaken the liberal and comprador elements in Iran, and that can only be a good thing. So I don't know whether you can say that the Iranian government of Pezeshkian has been completely disempowered. I hope it has, because it certainly deserves to. But we'll hopefully find out more in the coming days, because I'm going to do more research into it. Hello to Alex B from the rotten state of Denmark. Hello to Jerry, who says, Laif Maroof says Raisi was assassinated by Azerbaijan. He reckons Iran electing Pezeshkian and Azerbaijani and instead of conflict was a smart move. Well, I doubt that that Aliyev has the balls to do this on his own. I think that if it was, the Azerbaijanis might have been involved, but it's the hand of ultimately the US behind it, and the British operating with the Israelis. That's who was making the moves. Aliyev's a rat, and is a cowardly one at that. He would never have done anything like that against Iran were it not for very powerful forces who he ultimately serves, i.e. the US, the British, Erdogan from Turkey, and the Israelis being solidly behind him and willing to defend him. So it is ultimately a US, British, Israeli move, with maybe the Turks involved as well. I would guess probably so. It's exactly the kind of maneuver that I think would appeal to Erdogan on some level. And so the Azerbaijanis might have been involved in it, but not as the main players. I mean, the main players are in Washington and London, and to a lesser extent, Tel Aviv, maybe Ankara. Did Iran consent to a ceasefire, and if so, what are they thinking? Senseless to me, asks Slumbering Colossus. I would say that the Iranians agreeing to it isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as they use the break in the bombing, the US-Israeli bombing, to rebuild their defenses and root out the Mossad, CIA, MI6 cells that are operating inside the country, and to drastically overhaul their security and defense system. Because, I mean, the Israelis were tracking apparently like senior IRGC commanders who still had WhatsApp accounts. That's fucking run by Meta, which is, of course, a big tech firm run by Zuckerberg and others in the US. So why in fuck's name are like senior military figures using WhatsApp? So there's things like that they will need to sort out. But as at the moment, I would say that the revolutionary elements of the system have been strengthened, and they can use this time to repair the damage that was done by the US-Israeli strikes and get themselves ready for the next round, because the next round is coming. And I think that certainly Ayatollah Khamenei and those close to him, and certain maybe senior figures in the IRGC and military, do understand that the next round is going to come. What really caused the US to beg for the ceasefire, though, was the fact that the Israeli regime is staggering, is running out of air defense, and was in severe trouble. And so, but Iran had been damaged as well. So we need to bear in mind that that this is a two-way street, so to speak, and the ability of the Iranians to repair the damage done by this war will be key to how they're going to do in the next one. Because, as I said, the next one is coming. Right. Let's go back up here and find. Right. A Dingo Ate Me Baby says Cuomo killed too many people's grandparents to win. He killed a lot of his boomer voters too. Yes, he's a record during COVID. Good evening to Irish Partisan, who says good evening from Minsk, where Miguel Diaz-Canel, president of Cuba, was there today. Excellent. Abtin says if an Iranian president fighting the Israel mysteriously dies near politically captured Azerbaijan, it's not hard to put two and two together. Indeed. Hello to Marxist Down on Twitter. Evgeny Nikolaev says, how would you estimate the revolutionary potential in countries like Jordan and Egypt, where the majority of the population do not receive any imperial dividends like in Saudi or the UAE? Well, I mean, Egypt is an interesting one. It's got a huge working class. It has national service, so it's a huge working class, like the male side of which is militarily trained. I think the so-called Arab Spring and the rather bitter experience of that, and the restoration of the dictatorship there under al-Sisi, who is a complete stooge of the US, that was a very severe defeat, I think, ultimately for the Egyptian working class. I don't think that Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood was much good either. So you've got a lot of I think there seems to be a lot of disillusionment amongst the Egyptian proletariat. I don't have enough information as to exactly how the struggle stands at the moment in Egypt, but Egypt has great revolutionary potential, and also a huge working class and a lot of poverty, and a deeply corrupt military clique in the service of the US overwhelmingly, even though it has joined BRICS, rules over this, and is clearly in thrall to the US. Now, the reason why the dictatorship of Al-Sisi said no to the US a couple of times was because over the proposed ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from Gaza, was because Al-Sisi knew very well that if he engaged in that collaboration, that he would be fucked, and that there would be a revolt against him. So we will wait and see what happens in Egypt, but it is the key country in that part of the world, I would say, more key to this than Jordan, which is the reason why I think the US, Britain, and others probably put an awful lot of time and energy into trying to preserve the Al-Sisi dictatorship, no matter what. If they lose Egypt, then it'll have the same impact that Nasserism and its more radical phase had when that swept across West Asia and North Africa. It would have a tremendously radicalizing effect. So the imperialists will put an awful lot into making sure that the dictatorship stays in place in Egypt. As for Jordan, I mean, I know less about Jordan. I know that a huge proportion of the population are Palestinians. The kings of Jordan have always been British plants. I mean, this guy, King Abdullah, went to fucking Sandhurst, for God's sake. He's a complete stooge of the British. He follows his orders and does what he's told. There's a huge amount of, again, dirt poor working class elements in Jordan. Now, Jordan, of course, is a very repressive state with a secret police force, again, trained and equipped by the British. And it'll take a lot to overcome that. I mean, the Jordanian military is sizable and it's used for internal repression. It's certainly not used for fighting Israel or the US. So there will be a revolt against the wretched king. But again, I know too little about the organization of oppositional forces within Jordan to make a good estimate on that question. So I'll make a note to come back to it. But the time is coming, certainly for Al-Sisi and the kings of Jordan, because their rule is becoming increasingly unstable as their imperial sponsors start to wobble themselves. Jawed asks, is there a realistic danger that the Pezeshkian clique would try another round of talks with the degenerate West? Some of them would doubtless try it, but the mood, I would say, of the Iranian nation that from what I've observed seems to be very much against that. Very much. The Pezeshkian or Arakchi or behind them Zarif might fancy the idea of it, but like two things will stop them: one, domestic Iranian opinion, and two, the imperialists themselves. The imperialists will only have openly said that they will only engage in talks as basically a prelude to Iran's complete surrender. Trump said that. And now he says he's no interest in talks at all. So this is a farce that's been revealed as a farce. So the Iranians have no one to negotiate with, even if Pezeshkian was willing to crawl on all fours to Washington, D.C. The only thing Trump would do was kick him in the face. So it's an interesting question, and I don't think that the so-called reformists, the Iranian liberals, have any scope to negotiate now. I think that's done, and it's the American imperialists themselves who killed it off. Meanwhile, the Israeli takeover of Syria continues, says Caustic Grip. I think that the Zionists will find that Syria is going to be a harder thing for them to absorb than they think. At the moment that you have they're largely unopposed, so they can operate almost at will. They're trying to find themselves some a puppet regime in the south of Syria, amongst the Druze community there, who they can essentially use as their own militia. However, I don't think that's going to go particularly well for them. I think that the situation in Syria is going to get more and more unstable. The rule of al-Jilani is very unstable. He doesn't control large areas of the country. And that's going to end up with nobody really able to control it, I think. I hope that a unified national movement can come out of Syria, can emerge in Syria to oppose the Israelis principally, and Israeli and US domination, and that will be able to reunify Syria in resistance to the plans of the imperialists. I don't see there's some signs of that, but I don't know enough about it as yet to confidently pronounce on that. Al says, how hard is it for a country like UAE to have a dictatorship of the proletariat, of the working class and migrants? Has any revolution like this ever happened in the past? How hard is it? Well, I think the UAE is a false place. What's going to end up happening is that, like, when it comes to the collapse, when it comes to revolution, what will happen is the areas like Saudi, like the UAE, like Qatar, all of these will be, because they're very unstable and very false creations, they will all implode, and you'll get a new Arab Federation emerging. That's the way I think it will go. So there won't be a UAE revolution. There will be a wider revolution across the Arab world, which will see, like, Saudi and these other false creations join a wider federation, essentially, because these are all creations of like imperialism and are very unstable. Abtin says they got Soleimani in a similar manner. He was invited by the Saudis to a peace conference in Iraq, and then they took him out. The Saudis laid the trap. Yeah, I mean, this is why no one in Iran should trust the Saudi regime as far as they could throw it. It is again a complete creation of imperialism, and that its nature will not change because their interests are all their interests lie in the continued success of the imperialists, no matter what flirtation they're doing with BRICS. Much like Erdogan, these are characters who are ultimately reliable servants of the imperialists and cannot be trusted. For all that they periodically have a bit of a falling out, they always return to the fold. Hello to a name. Marius says the trajectory of New York City politics has been consistent since 1975, when the city was in a budget crisis, and Mayor Beam was told by the banks he had to sell off public housing and gut social programs. Very true. Let's have a look. Robert Fisk, worth reading. Yes, but with an advisory note, shall we say, that his politics were always quite dubious. I mean, his guy was very much an anti-communist, used to write pro Bin Laden pieces in the early 1990s. So very politically dubious character in some respects. Did a lot of very interesting reporting from West Asia all the way through the 80s and 90s in spite of that. So his book, I think it's called The Great War for Civilization, is a great compilation of his reminiscences of all that time. And that's very much worth looking at, because he did do a lot of interesting reporting, and you don't really get guys like that anymore. The period where men like that could exist in the bourgeois press has long since gone. Pavel says, I am reading theory and joined the online reading circle of Kommunistische Organisation, and I intend to join my union and try to get to know my community in Austria. Anything else I can do? Well, you seem to be doing pretty much everything that's necessary for getting active. Reading the theory, learning from it, joining the working class movement in whatever way you can access it in your country, and try to find people who can collaborate with you on a local basis. You seem to be doing all of the right things already. It's not easy getting active when you're doing it solo. I have the good fortune to be part of a party, but you seem to be doing all the right things already. So, but always keep on with the studying, and also the closer you can get to in-person studying as well in a group that will be local to you, the better. Hello to Wicked Witch of the Southeast. Hello to Comrade Davey. Caustic Grip says World War II was a conflict between colonial powers fueled by colonial labor. World War III doesn't have enough kindling to fuel itself. Well, that's why you're not going to get a World War II type conflict. You'll have conflicts of the sort that are waged in Ukraine, but I would say, just to disagree with you, Caustic Grip, on this one, they seem to have found themselves some human colonial labor to sacrifice. I mean, what's the death toll of Ukrainians now? Is it 1 million? Over 1 million? Certainly, like in terms of those dead, it's at least in the high hundreds of thousands now. Killed and wounded, it's in total, it's well over 1 million. Those are like World War I level Western Front style casualties. So that Ukraine is a very good example, in a horrible way, of the successes that the imperialists have had in puppeting nations, which is what we should bear in mind. That's a very successful example of the kind of thing they want to do with nations they take over. So they do have the ability to wield vast armies. Just that it's just not vast armies of their own citizens anymore, because they don't want to do it. Sid Hatfield says Vietnam was split in two as part of an operation to drive all Catholic Vietnamese out of the north to the south, run by Colonel Edward Lansdale of the OSS and later the CIA. Yes, just like, and again, it was something similar process in Korea. Jean-Michel asks, what do you make of the election in NYC? Is it worth supporting Zoran? I wouldn't if I was there. I wouldn't be wanting to spread any illusions in such a man. Basically, if I were a US citizen, I would categorically refuse to vote for the Democrat or Republican parties in any whatever form they presented themselves, whether it was the Republicans pretending to be the great populists in the form of the MAGA so-called movement, or whether it's the Democrats wearing the socialist label and proclaiming themselves to be in favor of social democracy, or whatever the hell it is they say they're in favor of now. I wouldn't place a single shred of faith in either of them, and wouldn't want to give the idea that either of them were doing anything other than cynical branding operations. Right. Right. Sid says, if we're going back to the beginnings, I'd say it started after 9/11. Dick Cheney told us as much, i.e. war that might go into 60 countries and would not end in our lifetimes. Interesting. If you've got a time you think the Third World War started, do contribute it, because I think these are all valid points. Nehat says, is there any economic demands in the UK or Europe by the people or any reasonable political offer to counter descending daily quality of life, or the mass is still confused and passive? Still largely confused. What we have is a nasty case of a social democratic hangover, which is that the masses, not all of them by any means, but large significant numbers of them, still wait for the reforms to come. They still wait for the return of social democracy, and social democracy isn't returning. Some have worked this out, which is why voting numbers are going down. But you keep getting promises of reform, promises of bringing back some kind of social democracy. Trump, in his own way, was promising in 2016 that he was going to sort of run as some sort of quasi New Deal figure. That was what he said some of the time. He said something completely different at other points. Obama, too, deliberately conjured like New Deal stylings. Of course, Corbyn did it. Even fucking Keir Starmer presented himself as the heir to the reforming social democratic tradition. None of this, of course, has any basis in reality. It's all just rhetoric. The politicians know that period of time was popular, so they do pander to it every now and again, or play up to it. But this is impossible to deliver upon. So it's going to take more time before revolutionary politics really takes off. Now, to answer your question about the demands to put forward, any demand now from the working class in like Britain, for instance, let's use old perfidious Albion as our example, is going to end up having to be disruptive to and threatening to the profits of the ruling class. The ruling class has no capacity to reform. Everything is geared towards supporting a completely parasitic system. So, for instance, if we put forward a demand around, let's just use housing as an example, like the mass building of council housing as a means to increase supply, and therefore not basically burst the private property bubble, burst the housing market bubble, that may well cause the banking system to collapse if that was done, which is the reason why the ruling class won't do it. So that's just an example. I mean, I can go more into that in a future episode as to why the housing bubble can never be properly burst by the ruling class and why they will be fanatically opposed to doing that. But so putting forward a demand like that for mass building of public housing would be good, because it would mobilize people around it if done well. And also then it would pose a challenge directly to the ruling class, because people would get mobilized around it, but the ruling class could never possibly give it to us, not without threatening the destruction of the banking system. So demands for reforms can be useful for mobilizing workers around, and also providing an educational lesson in that workers will be able to see just how fanatically opposed that the ruling class is to even the most basic of working class demands these days, and it will serve as both a mobilization tool and a lesson for the working class as to the necessity of socialism. And if the ruling class gives up a few things in order to try and stave off their defeat, then also that's a good lesson for the working class in terms of the need to mobilize to the point where the ruling class gets frightened enough to start making concessions. So there are ways to mobilize, and this is what we hope to do in the near future. Pavel asks, how will the empire conduct 20 years of war when it is deindustrialized and, according to bourgeois sources, a potential depression in the US core with repercussions in Europe is on the horizon? With great difficulty, Pavel, is the answer to your question, which is why they're doing things in this hybrid way. It's why they outsourced the manpower question in Ukraine to Ukrainians to have them fight and die for imperialism. It's why they outsourced the aggression against Iran. They do it via their air force. They do it via sabotage operations or via Israel. They can't wage war in the same way they did in 1914 to 18 or 39 to 45. It has to be done in other ways. So it's not going to be 20 years of war like it was between like 39 and 45 with like total mobilization, total devotion of like all domestic industry to war, no matter what Friedrich Merz or Keir Starmer say. They're not going to get that. What they're going to get is again, to go back to the point I made earlier, a series of wars that the biggest of them will look like the Ukraine-Russia war, which is in reality a NATO-Russia war. The smaller of them will be like different skirmishes, battles between like countries like Iran and the US acting through proxies like Israel. But it won't be like the all-out industrial mobilization, because the US and its allies can't do that. And if they tried to do that, it may well end up disintegrating their system. China can do it. The Russians can do it. Iran can do it to an extent. But the US and its allies can't do it, which is why you had the crazy ideas floating around, like the idea that the British had, that they were going to reindustrialize basically via India. But again, a classic like imperial move. Can't afford to pay workers in Britain to do it, to do the mass production of war material, so get it done in India, leaving aside the rather important question of how are you going to get it to the theatre of war if you've declared war on the Russians, for instance. So there won't be, I don't think, unless things go very, very off the rails, which it's always a possibility, but I don't think there's going to be open declarations of war against Russia or China. They'll try and do all of this via proxies and destabilization operations and exploiting internal antagonisms. That's the way they'll try and do it, and it won't work because the playbook on this one is being worked out bit by bit. Maria says Pezeshkin's faction was already being sidelined even before the June 13th Israeli attack. Interesting. Abtin says they're doing that work all by themselves. They crashed the currency market, got their own minister on fraud charges. Zarif disappeared to America. That's a government in worse shape than Trump's. Yes. Hello, David Ball. Going through some comments here. DE says, I've heard that Mossad operates quite freely in Azerbaijan, so you can imagine the other usual suspects do as well. Yeah, Azerbaijan's been a British project since the early 1990s, when Aliyev's father, the deeply corrupt former sort of late period Soviet bureaucrat, who apparently at one stage was in the running to be general secretary of the CPSU itself. That's how bad things got there. He signed a deal with British Petroleum in, I think it was 1994, and the British delegation was led by former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. And the British have been the single biggest external investors in Azerbaijan over the last 30 years. So Aliyev is a creature who is owned by imperialism completely, mainly British imperialism. So he might, make nice with Putin, shake hands and say, oh, remember the old days when we were all in the same system. But that guy, that fucking rat, is an absolute creature of imperialism to his core. He owes his position to British imperialism principally, but also the US and its various different satraps, such as Turkey and Israel. He has no independent existence. It's just it's a British literal gas station. That's what Azerbaijan has been reduced to under the rule of the Aliyev crime family. Moving on. Yes, they also banned Palestinian flags in Azerbaijan. Again, complete imperial puppet state. And also, doesn't make a move unless its master in London tells it to. So all that aggression against Armenia, that was cleared by London. Again, locally overseen by Erdogan and the Turkish state. But again, the orders come from London. They call the shots when it comes to Azerbaijan. A process that they're trying to repeat in other Central Asian countries, by the way, Kazakhstan, etc. Again, Azerbaijan, as it stands, again, essentially it's a British neo-colony, has no independent existence. T.G. Wilson says the SCAF, which is the Supreme Commanders of the Armed Forces, I think, run Egypt on behalf of the West. Yeah, they're controlled by IMF debt. It's a very efficient way of controlling such regimes. R says, do you think that there is still hope for Iran to completely get rid of its comprador elements, or is the rot too entrenched within the current political establishment? I wouldn't say it's too entrenched, but I'd say that they need to, at the very least, put these people in a box. Same way that Putin had to, in order to effectively control Russia, had to put the bourgeoisie in something of a box. The same is true for Iran. For the purposes of the unity and integrity of the state, they can't allow like the most like wretched bourgeois elements to have any influence anymore. Now there are national bourgeois elements in Iran, but the like comprador types, the types that are tied to the West, they can't allow them to have any power anymore because it's a question of the integrity of the state. Right. Right. Let's have a look. Where are we now? Marg Bar Israel says, what caused the 2008 financial crisis from a Marxist perspective? Is it the boom and bust cycles? Well, it's a gigantic crisis of overproduction, a gigantic global crisis of overproduction. And it's one of the repeated crises of overproduction that the imperialist countries have suffered from for many years. But you have a giant amount of capital itself that was overproduced. So you have a gigantic amount of capital washing around in the system now. As a result, again, this caused the 2008 financial crisis because you had more and more capital being created throughout the 90s and 2000s that needed somewhere to go, which is why if we look at the US, you look at like somebody made a good comment on the stream yesterday that the biggest period of capital export in US recent history was the Bush administration up to 2008. That's a symptom of this. You have the Bush administration repeatedly, the crisis really starts emerging very much towards the end of the 90s with the Clinton administration. And then you get into the Bush administration, the crisis intensifies, which is part of the reason why they do the invasions. It's part of the reason why they deregulate more of the economy, why they deregulated the housing and the mortgage market, though Clinton, had of course, started that process in the hope of being able to find profitable outlets for the gigantic amounts of capital being created. But in the end, they couldn't find profitable outlets for it. And now, the 2008 crisis was a product of that because suddenly you got the housing market and the credit market crashed in 2007 to 2008 because suddenly everybody realized, the ruling class realized that they were trading in, piles of shite and that there was no profitable outlet for their capital anymore. So they stopped investing completely. And the whole thing just judded to a grinding halt until, of course, first the Bush and then the Obama administration and then the administration of Gordon Brown here essentially opened up unlimited credit to try and get things moving again. And so they were literally, they started to attempting to bribe the bourgeoisie to start investing again. And that's what went on in 2008. So it's a crisis of overproduction of both commodities, but also of capital itself. And you have huge stores of capital in the imperialist countries now, which can't be invested profitably, which is why you get so many like frenzied asset bubbles as they attempt to find ways of making this into a profitable outlay, ways of investing this profitably. And they're not being able to find a sustainable way of making profit. So like they keep sitting on their capital, waiting for things to come along. Nothing ever does. And the entire system in the West now is plagued with things such as like zombie companies, which are kept alive, have been kept alive until recently by low interest rates and easy availability of credit. So they haven't done anything to resolve the conditions that led to the giant crisis of overproduction in 2008. They've just made it all worse, and it hasn't. So you've ended up with like a 17-year-long depression in the United States and elsewhere. Yes, you've had periods of growth, but they've been weak and anemic, both under Obama, then Trump, then Biden, then Trump again. So there's no way out. I mean, unless you took the approach of old Andrew Mellon, which is liquidate capital, liquidate labor, liquidate everything, which they're afraid to do because of the social consequences that would come about. So he's stuck in this descending cycle of increased poverty and disintegration. That's but it's balanced out by the fact that the West does have this gigantic amount of capital still available to it, and they keep again trying to invest it in various places. None of it provides us a suitable amount of profit. This is the crisis that we are in. It's a crisis that we will stay in, and it's only a downward spiral from here. Right, going down here. Molotov Cocktail says, off topic, but I would love a video on lumpens and false consciousness. Maybe it would be difficult to talk for an hour about lumpens and false consciousness. I'd need to do some research into it, but certainly I'll have a look at that in the future. Right, just going through here. Aim asks, why is Russia banning the Ukrainian languages in some territories of occupied Ukraine? I saw this on a European newspaper. I'm not aware of that. As far as I'm aware, the official Russian government policy in Crimea and in the new regions of Russia is to promote in the education system the Russian language and the Ukrainian language, that's the policy of the Russians in all of the 4 regions plus Crimea. So I'm not aware of them banning the Ukrainian language. So I'm going to, at the moment, until I see proof otherwise, I'm going to put that down to a propaganda story that was run by some Ukrainian new propaganda outlet to coincide with the NATO summit. Not that it did them much good. Right. Ben says, seems to be a problem with all even good career journalists, foreign correspondents, no ideological compass, no understanding, big exception, the late, great Andrei Vitchek. I haven't heard the name. If you could send me an example of his work on email, Ben, I'd be interested. Good afternoon to Sophia, who has joined us. Right. Mark Bar Israel says, I read some theory, but I have a question. Does all value come from human labor? Yes. Should animal labor be counted? Well, animals are counted as means of production, basically, as somebody I think has already said in the chat. But I would recommend if you want to read more about this, read the 2 relatively short pamphlets by Marx, Wage, Labor and Capital and Wages, Price and Profit, both available on the Marxist Internet Archive. I would also recommend reading Leontiev's original work on political economy, the pre-1953 version, if you can get it. You can get it from the communist CPGBML online store. I recommend that as well. Right. President Jesus says, Breaking Points is out chirping today that Mandani's victory is even more historic than AOC's. Well, of course they are. Of course they are. Well, they're not serious people. Like Crystal Ballbag isn't a serious person, and that plastic-looking chap that she co-presents with isn't a serious person either. Nor, I mean, what's his name? Saga Enjeti. Is still him these days? Haven't looked at that for ages. And I mean, that guy once made the serious argument when Top Gun Maverick came out. He looked very emotional, stared straight down the camera, and says, "We are so back." And I just creased up laughing and haven't been able to watch a single second of his program ever since then. Well, they're not serious people. They're just like they came about in, I think it was 2016, 17. They jumped on the Trump and Sanders wave and have been sort of playing the role of like populists, etc. ever since then. So the fact that like Crystal Ball is a mainline Democrat and Saga Enjeti is just a boilerplate Republican, just with like Trumpite stylings. Which, and again, Trump's whole thing in itself was just a brand. So you've got a guy doing riffing, a guy in Saga Enjeti doing a riff on a brand, and Crystal Ball like cosplaying as some sort of socialist, when in actual fact she's as a basic liberal, just like she always was. Now, as for anybody who with the extremely poor taste to regard Kyle Kulinski as a hot prospect, well, I'll only comment that any man who dyes his hair that color and dyes his skin that color is not a man to be taken seriously. Jerry says, didn't you once say, Alex, that the bombing of Yugoslavia were set off the latest round of wars? Yeah, I mean, I constantly like change my evaluation on this, to be honest, because I'm still studying it and thinking about it. You can make the argument that in actual fact, the new round of wars began in 1992. And began with the US's dismembering, or really earlier, like 1990. It began before when the Soviet Union was crippled and being destroyed from within. You can make the argument that the wars of imperial aggression started immediately with the moves against Yugoslavia that were being made really as soon as the 80s came along, as soon as Tito was dead. In fact, maybe arguably before then. But yes, you could say that and I have said that in the past, and I think it's worthy of further consideration, that the way they waged the war against Yugoslavia was markedly different to things they'd done before, though they did have certain continuities. So it is an argument that's worth making. It's possible to make that the whole modern war process began in 92, but that was very one way. I mean, the reason why I make my evaluation is that in the 1990s they basically got it all their own way. There was the Russian protest over Kosovo. That was significant, but at the time it didn't seem like it. It was more significant later. So the reason why I would say, like maybe Marius is right, 2011 or perhaps 2008, because 2008 is the moment that you actually get the Russians shooting back. I know there was the attempt to change tack under Obama, and it didn't really work out. The Russians destroying effectively the Saakashvili regime in Georgia, even though he hung around for a little bit longer, but he was effectively politically a dead man walking by then, and forcibly stopping the NATO advance in Georgia. I know NATO kept trying to reroute it, get its position firmly entrenched in Georgia, but ultimately it was something that they couldn't pull off. So if we're gonna say that the war is where you have a contestation between the US and those who are able to shoot back at it, even if it's not directly, I would perhaps say that that moment of contestation starts with 2008. So moving onward through your comments. Right. Not getting to all of them. So again, if I miss anything out, be sure to email me. Finnegan says, given our legal obligation to prevent genocide, surely Palestine action is acting legally. The British government won't call it genocide, but that doesn't matter because the ICC made the obligations of third state. I've lost the rest of your comment there. Well, I hope that the Palestine action uses that argument in their legal challenge. And to be honest, I can't see. Well, they could get away with. They've got the votes in Parliament to make Palestine action an illegal organisation. I think it's going to stir up too much opposition, though, and I think it's going to be a bridge too far for Starmer to do. He's incredibly unpopular. He is in deep trouble over this welfare thing. The so-called assisted suicide stuff is leaving a lot of people deeply angry with him and the Labour Party, including like his own Labour MPs. A lot of them rebelled against it. So he's in a very weak and ever weakening political position. I would say that the Palestine action should use that as their legal defense, and I think that that should be used to mobilize opinion for them and in favor of them. I think that ultimately this move will backfire on the Labour Party and it will fall apart. Even like Tory MPs, backbench Tories, were saying that this was a potentially dangerous move. Keir Starmer himself defended people who did similar actions 20 years ago regarding the Iraq war. So it's going to lead to a lot of problems for them. And in an attempt to appear tough, like whenever Starmer tries to, I'm dead tough, mate. He ends up looking ridiculous and fucking up. So I think this is where this is going to go. But there needs to be an active campaign in defense of Palestine action, and these arguments need to be made. Right, where are we? T.G. Wilson says, Alex, given the century-long ideological and violence attacks on workers, which aspects of revolutionary Marxist-Leninism are most relevant to our current plight? I would say that, to answer your question, the understanding of Marxism in the West is appallingly bad, and has been appallingly bad for quite some time. I would say in my own country and in the United States, revisionism set in almost immediately after World War II, leading all of the communist parties, as I've said many times before, into a death spiral. We need to go back to studying from scratch, basically. One of the things that attracted me towards my own party, CPGBML, was the fact that the party takes studying Marxist classics seriously. So studying wage, labor and capital, wages, price and profit, Lenin's three sources and component parts of Marxism, the what is to be done plus one step forward, two steps back, studying imperialism in the high stage of capitalism, studying the state and revolution, studying left-wing communism and infantile disorder, studying Stalin's work seriously, such as Foundations of Leninism, studying Mao seriously, which is something that the fucking Western Maoists don't and haven't for a long time. So studying things like works of Mao, such as The Correct Handling of Contradictions Among the People, Combat Liberalism, and the On Practice and On Contradiction, his work on guerrilla warfare, not just the book itself, but the other the lessons on protracted warfare. In fact, I'll probably end up coming up with a reading list, but also going back and studying things like Foundations of Russian Marxism, such as the work of Plekhanov before he turned into a reformist. There's a whole load of things we need to study and combine that with practice, of course. And essentially, we have to rebuild the traditions of Marxism, from revolutionary Marxism, from the ground upwards, as Lenin had to do when it came to his rebuilding work done at the time of the Second International. When the Second International totally collapsed, Lenin and his comrades had to rebuild the international revolutionary movement from scratch. We have to rebuild it from scratch now because there hasn't been one for decades. And we have to rebuild Marxism as a political tendency within the working class again. And again, that's something which hasn't been done properly for so many years. So we got a big job on, you know. T.G. Wilson replies saying, thanks for the answer. I admit to not having read Mao much after an email exchange with many years ago with Norman Finkelstein, who was a Maoist. I would say like there's Mao and Western Maoism are two different things. Western Maoism ended up becoming a lot like Trotskyism, and it was foolish, ultra left, based on slogans, not based on analysis, just based on endlessly repeating like lines from the Little Red Book, and in essence, completely violating all of the actual lessons that Mao taught. To Western Maoism just became like a cartoon. Look at the American Maoist groups. It's not a surprise that people don't want to read Mao because they associate Mao with that. Why would you read it? You know. But engaging with the Mao's intellectual and revolutionary legacy, that's incredibly important. There's a reason why he's like one of the great revolutionary heroes of the 20th century. It's like masterminding the defeat of the Japanese, and then the defeat of the Kuomintang, and then the successful defense of the Korean Revolution, and then all of the really important lessons that come from the Cultural Revolution. Not just the flashy stuff, but like the theorizing, the grappling by Mao and others of the time with the transformation problem. As that leads us back to, of course, things like the critique of the Gotha program from Marx. Another thing that dealt with the transformation, one of the biggest texts from Marx that dealt with the transformation problem, that needs to be studied properly. So, yeah, properly engaging with Mao's legacy in all of its aspects needs to be done, and dealing with some of the failures and the errors as well. I mean, the failures and the errors in Mao's case relating to like some of the ultra left turns that were taken in the Cultural Revolution, like the classification of the Soviet Union as social imperialist wasn't accurate and led to a lot of mistakes. But the Cultural Revolution itself needs to be analyzed properly and understood, and to be understood as a heroic, if ultimately partial failure. The success, as I've said before, from the Cultural Revolution comes in the fact that it preserved revolutionary tendencies inside China, which could otherwise have been snuffed out, and played a role in making sure that the open counter-revolution in 1989, the center of which was Tiananmen Square, didn't succeed. Right. Going to skip forward a little bit. WF 451 says Britain is done. Increasing anger, racism, violence, discontent, poverty, government of all colours adding fuel to the fire, driving people into penury, and letting in millions, which drives division and hatred. Well, they're not letting in millions. I mean, the number of people coming into the country has actually gone down. Parts of the country, like Scotland, where I am, are getting depopulated. So, what's happening is, you're right in the sense that Britain is in a downward spiral, WF451, but you are misdiagnosing what the reasons why it's happening. Britain in its current form is fucked. There's no other way to describe it. And there's no other way to describe it other than like a declining, decaying, and rotting imperial power, which is not going to revive. So the question then is, well, what do we do? right? The whole way I would look at this is like, in its current form, there's no future for this Britain, this perfidious Albion. The only way that this island of ours is to have a future is a socialist future, which can only come about via the overthrow of the ruling class. And unless we do that, then we're only faced with ever going to be going down in ever decreasing circles into greater poverty and degradation. Right. Surely the IMF is the biggest weapon of imperialism in the world. It's says Molotov Cocktail. It is a weapon. It's an important one, and it has to be understood properly. But the IMF's power derives from where? It's a tool, essentially. It's a tool in the hands of the ruling classes of Britain and the United States. Its power comes from the banking systems of the US and Britain. Principally, the Europeans are in there too, but it's the US and Britain which are the two principal imperial powers which power the IMF and the World Bank. And so the power of those organizations derives from the banking systems of the major imperial countries, is my response to that. All right, just going to scroll through some more comments here. Kill Jones says Obama bailing out the banks sealed our economic fate in the USA. There's been no recovery from that. Well, yes, but I mean, the alternative to bailing out the banks, well, there's a couple of alternatives. You could, as Peter Schiff insists, let them all go bankrupt, which would have led to a system-wide collapse, which no American president was going to let that happen. Or, if you wanted a reform program, well, Obama wasn't going to be the man to do it. The Democratic Party wasn't going to be the people to do it. There was, under the current system as it is set up, Obama took the only option that was ever going to be allowed to him. What was he going to do? Appeal to the masses? Rally them in support of a radical reform program? No. That was an option that was never going to exist. Right. Going through some more comments here. Again, if I miss your comment, I do apologize. Right. Jason appreciated the crystal ball bag comment. Very good. Socialist J says, I looked at the ACP and found their program to be highly revisionist. They want to leave markets, are fans of Dengism, and want to leave tons of private property. Well, I need to go back and read it again. I haven't read it. I read some of the initial stuff, but I haven't read the up-to-date version. So I'll commit to going back and reading it again. I mean, I am not a Dengist by any stretch of the fucking imagination. I think the best thing you could say about Deng Xiaoping was that he was a much cleverer revisionist than Gorbachev or Khrushchev. But he was forced to be, because the fact that he went through the Cultural Revolution and managed to survive it, and then came back and had to move in a much more careful way with his attempts at capitalist restoration. But he was successful in the sense that the Chinese now are a communist party running what has become a state-directed, heavily marketized economy. No point denying what it is. And that's created a load of problems which are being wrestled with by the CPC as we stand today. I think calling yourself a Dengist in the United States right now, or Britain, or anywhere else, is a completely redundant formulation. It's like market socialism, so-called, is the markets to portray market socialism as a positive thing is to ignore the lessons of history. Like, you may have to retreat to the market, as Lenin made clear, for a period of time. you may have to keep markets, keep private property for a period of time. But that needs to be addressed honestly with the masses. You need to be honest with the masses about the fact that keeping the market and keeping private property are a stage you have to go through. But the fact that you can't get rid of it straight away is because of limitations upon the revolution. And this is the failure of the Soviet revisionists, or perhaps the treachery of the Soviet revisionists. They kept declaring that each restoration of capitalism they were doing, or each restoration of like bourgeois norms that they were engaging in, was another advance towards socialism, and hence why they sought to deliberately depoliticize the Soviet proletariat. Keel Jones says Crystal Ball somehow got on the Bill Maher show. Nothing synthetic manufactured about that. Yeah, it's all a game. It's all a gag. It's all circus shit. Pre-booked, pre-organized, pre-scripted, pre-packaged. I'm not just talking about Karl Galinsky's hair. Socialist Jay said, I looked into the American Party of Labour and found their program to be really good, anti-revisionist along the Hoja line. But I haven't read that, so I can't comment on it. I would always be wary, just the same as with like people trying to replicate, Dengism in imperialist countries. Also be wary of people trying to replicate like Hoja or even Stalin. As the old phrase from Mao goes, seek truth from facts. Like, build your program off of the objective conditions that are faced by the masses inside the particular country, that you're in. Don't just mechanistically replicate something. Right. Well, if someone says in the chat, people reject Trotsky. It's always correct to reject Trotsky. Right. Sid says the main goal of the ICP should be to serve as a vehicle for educating the working class and being a political vehicle for the working class. That's in a nutshell. Well, the ACP is still in very early days. It's barely a year old. So I would say that it's too early to pronounce upon its success or failure yet. I mean, they've had a certain degree of success in terms of mobilizing people. But again, we don't know where it's going to go. I don't know where it's going to go. I'm not aware. I'm not in the United States. I'm not on the ground there. I'd have to rely on American comrades to reach a judgment on that. Also, can people do debunks against anti-Mao arguments? Stalin debunks, and I found many, but there's not enough debunks for anti-Mao arguments. Asks Mark Bar Israel. Good point. I will make a note of it. Edward asks, how do you defeat rightists and revisionists like Khrushchev or Deng Xiaoping? If you're a Marxist-Leninist, what lessons have you drawn from studying the defeats of Marxism and Leninism within these two contexts? I haven't finished my readings on the Cultural Revolution and its ultimate failure and defeat as yet, Edward. But for Khrushchev, I mean, his triumph was, I would say, a product of numerous things. All of which, by the way, Stalin was aware of and was trying consistently to struggle against. The real difference between Stalin and Trotsky, one of the key differences, was that Stalin, following Lenin, sought to keep the party together and to avoid a collapse into open warfare. He always sought to move with the masses. To follow the Leninist method of agitating amongst the masses so you got the correct level of support then moving amongst the party. Of course, a lot of this gets derailed in the 1930s, where they had to deal with mass industrialization successfully, as it turned out, and the constant sabotage attempts and the internal subversion of the party, including the subversion of the NKVD by people like Yagoda and Yezhov, and of course the loss of so many capable cadres in the Great Patriotic War, and the loss of revolutionaries like Zhdanov in the post-World War II period, all left the Soviet party in a position where its best cadres were dead, and in the Great Patriotic War, by necessity, a lot of power was accumulated in the hands of the first secretaries and others. Again, this was something Stalin was aware of and was trying to address it towards the end of his life. He was unable to do so, though. He died too soon. So the triumph of Khrushchev was a product of distinct problems in Soviet history, which were Stalin and the others were unfortunately unable to deal with. It's why Khrushchev was able to come to power relatively uncontested, and managed to stay there and defeat an attempt to remove him by Molotov and Kaganovich and others, and was only removed in the end because of his fellow bureaucrats found his erratic behavior to be too much, and they blamed him for the Cuban Missile Crisis, despite the fact that ultimately his conduct there wasn't the worst thing he did by any means. But I will have to come back to you, Edward, on the Cultural Revolution, because I'm still studying it, and I can't pronounce on it until I've done with the reading. Finnegan says, I've written to Starmer and set out every proven lie that are repeated in Parliament. Thanks for your thoughts. Well, that must have been a hell of a long letter, mate, because you'd have been there chronically. Every lie of Starmer's, it'd take about a book the size of all 3 volumes of Capital. Marg Bar Israel says, have you guys seen the GCSE history program on the USSR? Is really biased, said Least. Well, I'm not surprised about that. It always was. Right. The ACP and PSL do not differ over their lionization of China, says President Jesus. And I'd say you don't need to lionize somewhere to recognize its achievements and defend it against imperialism. We defend governments like Iran and Russia against imperialism without question and hesitation. Does it mean that we're Putinists? Does it mean that we're Khomeinists? No. We defend China and the achievements of the Chinese Revolution and the Chinese proletariat without hesitation. Does it mean we now have to become Dengists? No. Does it mean that we have to read all 4 volumes of Xi Jinping thought? No. I mean, I've read quite a lot of it. It's interesting stuff, but you can defend a country which is being subjected to attack from imperialism without going down the route of just saying that this is the greatest place in the world and everywhere should be like it. We're not doing fanboy stuff. We aim to do proper analysis using the methods of scientific socialism. Right. Would the ACP be a stronger proposition for the American working class if Jackson Hinkle wasn't in it? Asked Jason. I think Jackson Hinkle's role gets overstated by his friends and his enemies. I don't think the great bulk of the American working class knows who he is. So it's not that's holding the ACP back. I mean, what would hold the ACP back is the fact that they're dealing with 100+ year legacy of rabid anti-communism in the center of Western imperialism. That creates a lot of fucking problems to reaching the masses. and credit to the ACP in this respect, which is they are trying to find ways of reaching the masses in a way that other groups on the American left have not done. But I mean, I think that Hinkle's role gets wildly overplayed, to say the least. Have you read any of Steve Keen's work? He's critical of certain aspects of Marx. His arguments and its neoclassical economics have been very illuminating. I haven't read any of his stuff. I'm aware that he's a guy who's big into modern monetary theory, but I'm not well up on enough on his actual work to offer an opinion. Right. Just going through some more comments here. Edward says, is Iran signing the ceasefire deal a missed opportunity to obliterate Israel and US bases and expel Western imperialism for good? Is this a knife in the back by the comprador bourgeoisie in Iran? I don't think it's a mistake. I mean, it could, let's say it could turn out to be, who knows? But if they use this breathing space they've been given to, as I said earlier, repair the damage and address the security issues that have been exposed by the US-Israeli operation, then it's time well spent, basically. If they don't do any of that, then it was a mistake. And I don't think they were going to get rid of Israel and the US all at once, just by missile fire. Just as we say quite correctly when it comes to the US's delusional ideas about aerial bombardment leading to victory. Bombarding Israel would create severe problems for the Zionist state, but it would also perhaps force the hand of the US into a more aggressive stance against Iran, meaning open warfare. Maybe the Iranian system isn't ready to fully withstand that kind of escalation as yet. I don't know. I don't know what calculations like the Supreme Leader and the others on the Iranian Security Council are making. But if they use the time from this break in bombing to rebuild things properly and address internal issues, then it'll prove to be a good move. Was Beria good? Well, it depends which period we're talking about. There's an argument to say that when he was brought in to replace Yezhov, that he did right the ship at the NKVD and actually have it do decent work again, and ended the frame up jobs that Yezhov was openly engaging in. But then also there's arguments to say that he became a revisionist himself. There's arguments that, there was stories put around about him that he was some sort of pervert or possibly a serial killer. I don't know the validity of those because there's a lot of information that's only in Russian, and I know Grover Furr has done some work on this, but I haven't read the bulk of it yet. So I'm going to have to hold fire on giving you an answer on that until I've read more. Right. Just going through some more comments here. Right, okay. Do capitalists do no labor at all? Well, yes, mainly. How to debunk their argument that capitalists should get a piece of the pie? Well, who makes the commodities that the capitalist sells? What is all capitalist activity fundamentally based on? It's based on human labor. It's based on the labor of workers somewhere in the world working to produce commodities or extract resources from the ground. The capitalists these days, especially in the imperialist countries, just literally clip coupons, to use Lenin's phrase, and leave it at that. I can go more into that in a program in the future. So I'm going to draw things to a close for this evening. Thanks to all 471 of you watching, and we'll be back again with a Decline and Fall episode for you tomorrow. And thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back again with you tomorrow. But until then, here's a musical interlude, and I bid you all good evening.
Небо утреннего стяг в жизни важен, первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы.
Продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
С неба милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.
И вновь продолжает